Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first bilingual Bible class.
大家下午好，欢迎你来参加我们今天开始的双语读经班。
We have been doing and teaching our Bible classes every day for the past 2 years, starting from the pandemic.
在过去的2年，在疫情当中，我们已经开始了这个读经班。
And today we are going to start a bilingual with English and Mandarin.
所以今天我们就开始这个双语读经班，就是有英文和中文讲解。
Our focus is very much to understand the underlying Hebrew language that the book of Jonah is written in.
我们在这个约拿书将会致力关注在那个希伯来文里边的潜在意思。
And today, as we begin with Jonah chapter 1, I would like to show you how we can actually understand the book of Jonah more clearly from the Hebrew.
所以今天我们就从约拿书的第1章来开始读，让我们知道更加的了解，以希伯来文为基本来了解这本书。
We are not in a hurry to finish the book.
我们并不会急着要完成这本书的讲解。
Our focus is on being clear of what the text actually says.
我们将致力的去明白到底文字中的讲解意思是什么。
Now, most of us have read the book of Jonah before.
我们当中很多人已经读过约拿书了，
Many have read it many times.
甚至很多人已经读过很多次了。
Our purpose of studying the book of Jonah is to really begin to see what God is saying in the Hebrew rather than the translated language.
我们的最终目的呢，是想要知道神以这个希伯来文中是要告诉我们些什么。
Today, as we begin, I would like to introduce you to the background of the book.
今天我们开始呢，是开始介绍这本书的背景。
Very little is said about the book of Jonah.
很少人讲到关于这个约拿书。
And nothing much about the background is written in other parts of the Bible.
甚至关于这个约拿书的背景呢，在其他圣经里面的其他部分也相当少提起。
But I will attempt to show you the relationship and the position of the book of Jonah with regards to the kings and of the kingdom of Israel and the kingdom of Judah.
所以呢，今天呢，我们就看一下这个约拿书的和这个以色列和犹大这时代的王国的关系。
Now, as we begin, let me show you the background of this book.
来，我们看一下这本约拿书的背景。
This is the timeline of the book of Jonah.
这个就是约拿书的时间或是那个时代。
It is important for us to place Jonah or the book of Jonah into its correct location.
Pastor, can you repeat?
It is important for us to place the book of Jonah in its correct place.
OK，将这本书放在这个时间的设对正确的地方是很重要的。
Now, many of us may not realize that the kingdom of Israel at the time of Saul, David, and Solomon is a united kingdom.
当时
We
我们要明白，在所罗王和Solomon 呢，
Saul, David, and Solomon.
David and Solomon，就是在所罗王、大卫王，还有就是所罗门王的时代呢，是一起的这个王国。
And after the time of Solomon, we find that God broke the entire kingdom into two parts.
我们发现到在所罗门王国之后呢，以色列呢分成了2个部分。
The northern kingdom is called Israel.
北部的王国是叫以色列，
The southern kingdom is called Judah.
南部的王国呢是叫犹大，
And the southern kingdom continues the house of David.
而南部的犹大国呢就继续着大卫王的统治。
Now, at this point in time, you would find that we have a few prophets.
在那个时代呢，那个时候呢，有好几个先知。
We have the prophet Elijah.
我们有以利亚先知，
And then after the prophet Elijah, we have the prophet Elisha.
在以利亚先知过后，就出现了以利沙先知。
And in the northern kingdom of Israel, we have many kings.
那么在北部的以色列国呢，就有很多的国王，
And almost all, if not all, the kings of the kingdom of Israel are bad.
大部分的那些以色列的王呢，都不是好的。
And in the south, in the kingdom of Judah, we have some very good kings.
那么在南部的犹大国呢，就有一些是好的王，
But basically, many of them are also bad.
基本上呢，大部分也不是很好。
Now, if you look at this chart, this is the way that the Bible portrays timeline.
你看见这个图表这个就是它表达出这个圣经的时间。
And oftentimes in the ancient times, it will talk about when a king begins to reign in which year of the other king.
这边你可以看到古代的时候从这个王从哪里什么时候统治到哪里。
And in China, it is the same.
在中国也是一样。
And you will always talk about the king that will succeed the one before them.
你会看到这个王继承另外一个王的王位还有他们的年代。
And in the Bible, you do have that when you have the king starting that will succeed the one before.
所以你可以看到在这个圣经里面也是有，就是这个王他是继承上一个王的王位。
And by the time this king starts, you also know at which year is the king of the south reigning.
所以当时你可以看到，也南部的时候，那个王的年代也是即使他在位的时候。
And so when you read the book of First and Second Kings, First and Second Chronicles, you would find a lot of this historical timeline.
所以当你阅读这个列王记上记下的时候呢，你就会可以看到这些王的统治的时代。
But many a times we find it hard to understand the book of First and Second Kings.
很多人发现到很难去理解这个列王记上或是列王记下。
Now, when we come to the book of Jonah,
当我们来到这个约拿书，
Jonah is mentioned once outside the book of Jonah.
约拿书在这本约拿书之前都有是以外都有提到他。
And the only time that Jonah was mentioned is in 2 Kings chapter 14, verse 25.
有一次呢，就是在列王记下的第14章24节有提到约拿。
And when he talks about Jonah, Jonah seems to come from the northern kingdom of Israel.
当提到约拿呢，原来他是来自北部的以色列王国。
And he comes at a time of the reign of Jeroboam.
他出现的时候是在耶罗波安王的时候。
And at this point in time, the book of Jonah comes in for our study.
所以就在那个时代呢，这个约拿书出现在我们的研究里。
And a little later, we would see the book of Amos.
然后接下来我们会看到阿摩斯书。
And that will then take us into another episode of the history of Israel.
那个是就是以色列王国历史的另外一个章节了。
I will share with you this slide so that you can actually refer to it as you wish.
这个图表我们将会分享出去，所以你可以参考。
Let us go back to Jonah chapter 1.
让我们回到约拿书第1章。
Let us begin to understand the book of Jonah chapter 1.
那我们开始来理解约拿书第1章第1节。
Jonah chapter 1 verse 1 reads this way. The word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying.
耶和华的话临到亚米太的儿子约拿说。
Now, many times when we read these words, we don't really think much about the words.
很多时候我们读这个字呢，并没有真正的去想到它。
Now, let me just explain some of these words from the Hebrew meaning.
让我们看一下这些字眼在希伯来文的意思。
Now, the word, the English word, and this is the Chinese word, has a meaning.
这个话呢是有一个意思。
Many times we think that the word means certain speech.
很多我们以为这个话呢就是语言。
But in the Hebrew, the idea of word or davar really means an issue or a matter or a problem.
其实这个话呢，在希伯来文是叫 davar， 然后它的意思呢是说问题、事情。
These are things that God wants to address.
这些是上帝所要表达的。
When you read about this particular word, it means that God has something to say about a situation.
所以在这里呢，耶和华是要告诉你们一些事情、一些问题、一些情况。
So it is not just a matter of saying something.
所以并不是说一些话而已。
And so this is the word that comes from God or belongs to the Lord.
所以呢，这个话呢是属于耶和华的话。
Now, one of the things that I have found very interesting is that the name of God is Jehovah.
我发现到一个很有趣的事情，就是神的名字呢就是耶和华。
And the Chinese has a very similar, I would think, accurate sound of the name.
而我们的中文呢是一个很准确的名字，就是耶和华。
Unfortunately, the English does not represent the name of God very well.
但是在英语方面呢，并不表达得很准确。
Now, in the English language translation, they are following the style of how the Jews treat the name of God.
英文呢，他们多数是以犹太人是怎样对待那个神的名字。
When it comes to the name of God, the Jews do not say the name of God.
犹太人呢，其实呢，并不讲出那个神的名字。
And they would replace the name of God with terms like Adonai.
而呢，用另外一个字眼，比如说 Adonai 来代替神的名字。
Adonai means my Lord.
Adonai 的意思是说我的主。
And so the English then uses the Lord to represent the name of God.
在英文里面呢，他们就用 the Lord 这个字呢来代替耶和华的名字，神的名字。
And this here in the Hebrew is the name of God.
好，这个希伯来文字呢就是耶和华的名字。
And so you can see, those of you who can read both Chinese and English will be able to see the differences between the two translations.
所以呢，你能够读英文，也能够读中文的话，就看到英文和中文的差别了。
Now, the next word here in the English is came to.
好，在这边这个字呢说临到。
Now, this is the word came to.
临到
Now, what does that mean?
是什么意思呢？
A lot of times when we read the English or the Chinese, you would think that something just came into the mind of Jonah.
通常我们都会以为是说，可能是约拿突然间想到了，突然间在脑中想到了。
But in the Bible, whenever God reveals himself to a prophet, he would generally speak to the prophet through a dream.
好，但是在圣经里，当神呢向一个先知显现的时候呢，大多数是通过一个梦。
It is never a way, is never, the prophet can never see God face to face.
先知是从来不能看到上帝的脸。
It is never like Moses and God.
并不是好像这个摩西见到上帝。
And so God would want to tell Jonah what is in his mind concerning these issues.
所以上帝要告诉约拿关于这个事情，关于这情况是什么。
And God would speak to Jonah through a dream.
所以呢，上帝就通过一个梦告诉这个约拿。
Now, many of us will realize that when you are in a dream, you cannot remember what is said.
很多人以为我们其实在梦中呢，我们记不得了，记不起了，而醒来之后记不起了。
And that is how it is for us who sleep and dream.
所以那个就是我们在做梦。
But for a prophet, he is not really sleeping, but it is in his mind that he is able to see God in a blur way.
但是先知呢，他并不是真正的睡，而是呢在梦中呢可以看到上帝。
And so it is in his mind that he is talking to God in a real way.
所以在他的脑中呢，他是真正的在跟上帝讲话。
And it resembles something like a dream.
所以就很像是在梦中的梦。
And these things that God has said in the book of Jonah came to Jonah in this form.
所以呢，这番话跟上帝跟约拿说的，就是以这个方式来跟他表达的，临到约拿。
Now the next concept here is this word here, Amittai, right? Amittai.
亚米泰。
Amittai is a place which is in the kingdom of Israel in the north.
阿米泰其实是一个地方，就是在北部以色列国的。
And Amittai's son's name is Jonah.
这个亚米泰的儿子就是约拿。
Now, Jonah's name has a meaning.
约拿的名字呢有个意思的。
And Jonah's name means dove.
那个他的意思就是白鸽。
Or you can call it a pigeon.
就是白鸽，鸽子。
And it represents a very innocent name.
所以它代表一个很洁白无辜的。
Now, in this verse 1, you find that it is God who is speaking to Jonah.
所以在这里呢，就是耶和华对约拿说。
It is not Jonah trying to talk to God.
并不是约拿对耶和华说。
In the Hebrew culture, we will understand that God is the Almighty.
在希伯来文的文化里呢，上帝是至高至上的。
And it is only God speaking to man to give instructions.
所以只有上帝呢跟人呢通话讲话，是给指示。
And this is the word that God is saying to Jonah.
所以这个就是上帝的话临到约拿。
And remember, word means matters and issues.
而这个话呢，就是指事情、问题。
Now, this last word in verse 1 is saying.
好，最后一个字说。
And when you read a word like saying, it has meaning.
所以这个说是有意思的。
It is God using spoken language that Jonah understands to talk to him.
说就是上帝用所说出来的话语告诉他。
And Jonah understands what God is saying.
然后约拿也明白耶和华的话。
And in this case, we are very clear that God is speaking to Jonah in the Hebrew language.
所以在这里呢，耶和华告诉约拿是以希伯来文说的。
Although we read our Bibles in the English and Chinese,
虽然我们读的圣经可能是英文、中文，
but God spoke to Jonah in Hebrew.
但是耶和华对约拿说是以希伯来文。
Please do not misunderstand that God spoke to Jonah in English or Chinese.
所以耶和华并不是用中文或是英文对约拿说。
And so we need to understand, what did God actually say in the Hebrew?
所以我们就要以希伯来文来明白理解耶和华说什么。
And this is the reason why we have this Bible class.
所以呢，就是我们要举办这个双语读经班的目的。
We will not rush through the book.
我们不会急着去读。
We will slowly go through the book verse by verse.
我们会一节一节的去研读。
You will discover that there is a lot of things that is not said or understood in the language we read the Bible.
你会发现到呢，很多那个字的意思什么呢，并不是我们之前所明白的。
Now let us go to verse 2.
那我们看一下第一章第二节。
And in verse 2, God begins to speak and say things to Jonah.
所以呢，耶和华就开始对约拿说。
Now, one of the observations eventually you will see is that the Chinese translation is often better than the English translation.
你会发现到中文翻译其实比英文翻译更好。
We begin verse 2, and God says, "Arise, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out against it, because their wickedness has come up before me."
你起来往尼尼微大城去，向其中的居民呼喊， 因为他们的恶达到我面前。
Now, if you read it this way, you may not even want to stop and think about the verse.
如果你这样读的话呢，你相信你都不会停下来去看那个字眼。
Because the way it is translated is like a storybook that you would keep reading on.
因为它的翻译的方式呢，你就会好像读故事书那样继续的读下去。
But when God spoke in the Hebrew, he was not telling a story.
当耶和华在以希伯来文说话的时候，他并不是在讲故事。
God has a very important message to tell Jonah.
其实他有一个很重要的信息要告诉约拿，
And God has it in his mind that it is so important that he must say it.
而耶和华眼中这个是非常重要的，他一定要告诉约拿。
And so Jonah is told, verse 2 onwards.
所以在第2节，
And it says, arise.
你起来。
And arise literally means stand up.
这个起来呢，其实是站立起来。
And the Chinese has a very good, and it's translating very closely to the Hebrew.
所以这个起来呢，其实跟希伯来文的原文呢非常的接近。
Now, that is not to say that the English arise is not correct.
并不是说英文的不完全正确。
But the way that it is understood in the English, we don't really pay much attention to people telling us to stand up.
这因为在英文里面呢，并没有那个说站立起来的意思。
In the Hebrew language, the words that is being used are often action-oriented words.
很多在希伯来文呢都是以行动为主的字。
And the reason why Hebrew is in an action-oriented perspective is so that those of us who are listening to it can actually imagine what is happening.
以希伯来文呢都是以行动为主的字眼，那么呢，听众呢都可以想象出那个意象，行动的意象。
Now, we read this word arise, and then the second word is go.
第二个就是往字，
And the word go literally means walk.
这个往呢就是走路走向。
Now, in the old days, people don't ride horses or ride donkeys to their places.
古代那时候呢，没有人呢是做驴子和是马。
Now, very seldom we read in the Bible that people actually ride horses and donkeys.
那么很少没有读到说古代人是做驴子或者是骑马。
But very often you would see the word walk.
但是时常会看到那个字走。
And it is to walk literally, physically, move your legs and bring yourself to a particular destination.
所以呢，其实就是真正的用双脚来走路到你的目的地去。
Now, the other thing that we don't read in these two words is the concept of an urgent command.
所以呢，这边我们也没有看到那个可以说是非常紧急的的号令。
The word arise and go is in what we call the imperative. It is a command.
那个是一个呼召，就是一个指示，就是起来然后走去。
And we don't read this in the translation.
但是在那个翻译语文里边，我们看不到。
It is God telling Jonah, it is urgent, you must arise and then go.
是 耶和华告诉约拿，这个是紧急的，然后叫他起来，然后你一定要走向去。
Now, the idea of arise means that he is not standing up.
这边的起来呢，并不是他站立起来，
It means that Jonah is not standing up at this time.
当时呢，他听到耶和华的话语的时候，他并不是站着的，而是要起来。
He could be seated down or he could be lying down.
他可能是在坐着，也可能是在躺着。
And that is why God says, stand up, walk.
所以呢，耶和华说你要站立起来走。
And so these are all action words so that you can imagine Jonah getting up from his bed and having to walk out of his house.
所以这些都是行动的字眼，所以你会想象到这个约拿就是要站立起来，然后走路走向。
Now, where is God telling Jonah to walk to?
那么耶和华告诉约拿要走向去哪里呢？
You may think that walking is a very difficult thing to do.
你以为走路，你会认为走路是一个困难的事情。
I think walking for me is difficult.
对我来说，走路是相当困难。
When I first started studying the Bible, I noticed there were a lot of words like walk.
当我开始读圣经的时候呢，发现到很多字都是讲这个走路行走。
And it makes me very tired because it's walking everywhere.
我会觉得相当的辛苦，因为到处的走着去。
When you read in the book of Genesis, Abraham is walking everywhere.
所以你看到创世纪里面亚伯拉罕呢是走去的。
So in Hebrew, it places a lot of emphasis to use the word walk to become an instruction to go and do something.
所以在希伯来文里面呢，这个走呢就变成一个指示去做东西。
And so Jonah is to go to Nineveh, the great city.
所以呢，约拿呢就是要去这个尼尼微大城去。
Now, what is Nineveh?
好，这个尼尼微大城是什么？
Now, Nineveh is located in the present northern Iraq.
尼尼微就是我们现代地图里面的伊拉克的北部。
And in those days, this tells us that the kingdom of Assyria has started to grow very powerful.
我们在历史看到当时的亚述人王朝呢非常的强盛。
And the capital of Assyria is Nineveh.
而当时的亚述人王朝的他们的首都就是尼尼微城。
And we also can find out in today's archaeology that Nineveh is a very large city.
从现在的考古的发现其实呢这个尼尼微呢是个很大的城。
And so the idea of great gives us the image of a very large city.
所以这边讲到大城是一个非常极大的城市。
It also gives us an imagery that in the city are many people.
所以给我们一个印象，就是这个大城里住了很多很多的人。
It is also to tell us that Nineveh is a very important city.
也告诉我们说，这个尼尼微是一个很重要的城市。
And that is what it means by great.
所以呢，这个大的意思。
Now, when we come to the word city,
当我们来到这个字城，
it means that it is a place where it is walled up all around.
所以这个地方呢，肯定是有那个城堡围起来。
Now, what is the difference of a city and an unwalled village?
有围墙的城和那些没有围城的乡村有什么不同？
Now, in Israel, there are two kinds of cities.
在以色列呢有两种的城市，
And also in that part of the world, they all practice the same way.
所以那个其他部分的地方也是一样。
You find that in the open spaces where the common people live, they will have houses built, but there are no walls, and they do their agriculture and they will take care of their animals freely.
你发现到在那些空旷的地方，就有人们住在那里，他们有种植房屋在那里，
And it is not protected.
但是呢没有保卫，
That's why there are no walls.
所以就没有那个城墙。
So when an enemy comes, they will easily fight and conquer those unwalled villages.
所以这些没有围墙的村落呢，敌人来了，他们就很容易进攻。
And remember, these are places where the common people live.
这些就是普通人住的地方。
When you come to a city,
当你来到一个大城，
you find that all around will be big, tall walls.
你会发现到这个城市的四周呢，都有那些高高的围墙。
And it means that the people inside the city is well protected.
所以呢，在这个围墙里面的居民呢，就得到了保卫。
And these are the differences of the life in those days.
而这个呢，就是他们之间的差别的生活了。
Now, Nineveh is a very big walled city.
这个尼尼微大城呢，是一个很大的围墙的城市。
And you need to have this in your mind as you imagine a very large city with high, thick walls.
所以你要想象得到就是这个大城呢，有个很长、很厚的、很高的围墙，
And many people inside.
而且里面住了很多居民，
And many important people live in there.
而且呢，里面住了很多重要的人士。
Now, this is a time when Assyria is becoming strong.
这个时候呢，就是这个亚述人王朝非常的强盛。
Now, what is God's complaint against Nineveh?
耶和华呢对这个尼尼微有什么投诉呢？
Now, you would find that these are the words that God is saying that you need to go and cry out against it.
你会发现上帝用的这个字眼就是向其中的居民呼喊。
And the idea, the key word here is to cry out.
呼喊，
What does it mean to cry out?
这个呼喊是什么意思？
Now, again, this cry out is an imperative command.
而这个呼喊呢，就是一个指示。
And the idea of call out is to cry out very loudly.
他的意思是说，要很大声的呼喊呼叫。
So that when Jonah goes into Nineveh, he has to call out loud in such a loud voice that everyone can hear.
所以呢，约拿必须要到尼尼微大城去，用很大的声音来呼喊，让每个人能够听到。
But the idea here is to cry against it.
而这边是说要 cry 向他们呼喊。
And the Chinese and English doesn't seem to translate this clearly.
所以中文和英文呢，在这里都不是很完整的能够翻译出来。
And what it means is you are to cry out for this reason.
所以呢，要向这个居民以这个理由向他们呼喊。
So you're going to cry out all upon the city.
就是向城中的人呼喊。
And you understand this, when the Bible says to cry out against the city, it is not against the houses, against the walls.
所以这边呼喊呢，并不是不是相对的那些围城。
It is to cry out against the people.
不是向围墙，而是向着居民呼喊。
And so the Chinese actually translate it very well.
所以我们中文里面呢，翻译的很正确。
The English seems to just talk about the city itself.
在英文的翻译里，好像只是向这个城市、这个城墙呼喊。
But the Hebrew doesn't really say about the people, but it implies the people.
在希伯来文虽然没有讲说居民，但是呢，它指的是向居民呼喊。
Because in the idea of the Hebrew language, city also means the people.
因为在希伯来文中，城呢，也就是代表其中的居民。
And so the Chinese uses the same Eastern thinking to translate.
所以呢，这个中文呢，就是我们东方人的思维来翻译。
Now, what is the reason to cry out against Nineveh?
所以呢，为什么要向尼尼微的人呢呼喊呢？
Now, the reason is given here because.
理由就是因为。
And the reason given is that their wickedness has come up before me.
因为他们的恶达到我面前。
So now there are two key words I want to explain.
这边有一个重要的字眼，我们要解释一下。
The first key word is wickedness.
就是恶。
Whenever we talk about wickedness like here,
所以这边的恶呢，是指在这里是指
it's not the same as how we imagine wickedness to be.
并不是我们想象中的恶的理解啊。
You need to understand that this word wicked or the Chinese word in the Hebrew is ra'a.
在这个恶呢，在希伯来文是叫做 ra。
And you'll find that this is not strictly a moral problem.
你会发现到呢，这个恶呢，并不一定是道德上的问题。
I would like to point out to you that whenever the Bible talks about evil or ra'a, it means that it is something that God does not like when he sees it.
这个恶呢，就是在上帝眼中呢，就是上帝看到了，并不喜欢，并不喜悦。
Notice it is always very action oriented.
这个呢，都是以行动为主的。
It is what God sees in his eyes that he is not happy with.
就是在耶和华的眼中呢，他并不喜悦。
He sees that it is wrong in his eyes.
他认为呢，在眼中是不对的、不好的。
It is not what he wants to be done.
他并不喜欢这样做。
It is against his desires.
那个是违反耶和华的意愿。
This is called evil.
那个就是恶，
and it can be seen.
而且看得到的。
Now it says here, it has come up before me.
这边说达到我面前，
Now the Chinese have translated it very well.
在中文呢也是翻译的非常好。
First of all, the idea of come up,
就是达到，
it means that the actions of Nineveh has gone up to God.
就是尼尼微他们的行为呢已经升上达到耶和华，
And so it gives us an idea that God is up there and Nineveh is down here.
所以给我们一个印象，就是神在上面，而呢尼尼微在下面。
And whatever they have done, it has been reported to God.
而他们在尼尼微所做的已经报告升上到耶和华。
Now, one of these days, we will talk about how God manages these things from the Hebrew Bible's viewpoint.
有一天我们将会以这个希伯来文的观点来看，可以成为这样。
But it is enough for us to understand that the evil actions of the people of Nineveh has been reported upwards to God.
所以这里面看到尼尼微的人所行的恶行呢，已经升上达到耶和华上面。
Now, the next word is before me.
哦，这个另外一个就是我面前。
And the Chinese has translated this very literally.
好，中文呢也是一样哦，在文字表面翻译的出来的。
It literally means
面
to
前
my face.
就是到我的面前。
And so the idea of face is there in the Chinese.
那个面在哪里？面前。
The concept of face is in the Chinese.
这个脸脸就中文里面有表达出来，就是在面前，
And it is in front of the face.
就是我的脸前面。
And so the idea is that the evil actions of the people of Nineveh has been reported up to God and presented in front of his face.
所以就是说，尼尼微他们的人的恶行呢，已经升上达到耶和华的面前。
And God is looking at this matter.
所以上帝呢就看着这个事情，
And he is telling Jonah to stand up, walk to Nineveh, and do these things.
所以他就呼召这个约拿站立起来，走路到尼尼微去做这件事情。
Now, we come to the end of today's session, and we have spent a lot of time talking about the Hebrew.
好，我们来到今天的结尾，我们花了蛮多时间来讨论这个希伯来文的意思。
I hope that you are able to understand this passage even better.
我希望你能够借着这样，你能够更理解了这个章节。
And we will continue next week.
我们下个星期再继续。